Okay. Hi. So we're back talking about abuse, and we're going to talk today a little bit about the idea of how things are reported. The bad teaching that we want to address is this idea that you reported it wrong. That however you told about it, who you told, when you told them, how you told them, that you did it wrong. And so this ends up becoming a blaming of the abuser. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, when we get into abuse, what that means to kind of combat that bad teaching that kind of keeps us from being able to handle an abuse situation well. So how many are familiar with Bill Hybels? Explaining many ordinary Christians, vast majority of non-Christians have no idea who he is. But he is a hugely influential person in church movements, in mega churches. If you're familiar with really big churches since the 1970s, Bill Hybels planted Willow Creek Church in 1975 in a theater in Chicago, and his goal was to have a church with more modern music and feel, a relaxed atmosphere. These are things we see all over the place now, but it was pretty revolutionary then. The church got huge. It became the model that many aspiring pastors use to grow their churches. They had slick processes, great systems for everything they do. They're the model for a mega church as a business. Bill Hybels was a CEO type of person. He wrote a number of best-selling books. If you grew up with Becoming a Contagious Christian or things like that, they were used a lot. And they hosted conferences. I mean, they had celebrity speakers like Bono and Nelson Mandela and stuff coming to talk about leadership at these conferences. Huge people. And he was even close with Bill Clinton in the 90s when Bill Clinton was in office. He was, kind of at his peak. He was actually very close to Bill Clinton, was there advising him through a lot of crises and stuff. And so this is a very influential guy. In 2018, several months, he was scheduled to retire at the end of 2018, and he's getting there's already this whole plan and everything set up, but then a bombshell report came out in the Chicago Tribune where they detailed allegations with at least 9 women spanning decades of his ministry that he had sexually harassed. There's even a prolonged affair with a married woman. He initially forcefully denied all these accusations. He's calling them outright lies. He was very adamant about it, but the facts really caught up with him, and soon the church, he had to resign. The church had to apologize for how they had handled it, how they had enabled him, and how they supported him through the process. It was a big mess, and that church is crumbling right now. It's been a really bad few years for that huge church, and the details were kind of what you'd expect from a powerful leader trying to use his position to get sex. He would travel with women for meetings. He would invite them to his room for these, leadership talks and things like that. He'd compliment their looks. He would try to kiss them. Some of them, refused and they left, but, others, there became longer standing issues that came up from that. People always wonder, though, when something like this comes out, it's been decades, going back. He planted his church in the 70s. Some of these go back to at least to the 80s, I know, of allegations against him. And people say, well, why didn't these women come forward when it happened? Why didn't they say anything? Some of them did report it to elders at the time. Others didn't really know. They didn't realize this was a pattern with other women, and so they thought this was just a weird thing that happened with them. They wrote it off as a weird, moment of weakness for him. They thought, oh, he was really stressed out, and this was a really long trip, and he just seemed like to be under a lot of pressure. And I think he just kind of crumbled in that moment, and in a weak moment made this weird advance toward me. But then they just let it go, and they moved on. They didn't know anything else that this was going on. So, and there's also examples here, like Carrie LaDucer talked of how the church repeatedly pressed her to meet with Bill Hybels alone. She did try to confront it, and she got this really harsh response. They pressed her. They said, you need to meet with him alone. The church claimed that according to Matthew 18, they were required to confront him individually first, and thus they were in sin for spreading this information. If they talked to the Chicago Tribune and put this out in public about the church without talking to him directly, without initially confronting him directly, that they were gossiping, they were spreading this, and so they were the problem. This is a tactic this church used repeatedly, from what I understand, toward their accusers. And so from what people said, she was being repeatedly told by elders that those investigating that she was lying, she was misrepresenting everything that she was sharing. And so the damage to women like Carrie and others was huge. I think it's one thing, the damage of what he did and the way he acted, but the damage to women by the church was huge. It compounded the problem because it turned the spotlight on these victims that were hurting and traumatized, and it blamed them because they had an improper process of reporting. So, as we continue to talk about abuse, remember, we defined abuse. This is what we were calling it: harming you to make me feel better. Okay, and so we've talked about some hallmarks of abuse. Remember, we talked about a power differential. We talked about manipulation, violating consent, and dehumanization is some of the characteristics of an abusive dynamic. And so I want to talk today about what it's like to report it. There's lots of reason a person won't report abuse. They may not realize at first that this behavior is abusive. They might be afraid of the abuser's response. If they tell, they might not think anyone will believe them. They might not be able to function well enough to tell their story very coherently. All these things lead a person to hesitate when the opportunity comes to report their abuse. So many of these concerns are valid because when they do report, victims often are not believed, or they're criticized and blamed for not doing it the right way, just like what happened with Bill Hybel. So I want to talk about today and why it's so difficult to come forward. And my hope is it's going to give you compassion for victims and the tension that they face, as well as discernment to see through one of the tactics that abusers use a lot. So I want to start by addressing one of the common bad practices by the church in this regard. And that's exactly what we just heard about at Willow Creek, was this, I would refer to as the Matthew 18 process. This gets used a lot. And so I think it's good that we clarify what it really says in Matthew 18, what it's really addressing, and that'll allow us to see through some of the abusive way that it gets used in a victim's situation. So we look at it in Matthew 18, starting in verse 15. This is the passage they're referring to. So verse 15 through 18. If your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you've won your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take one or two more with you, so that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every fact may be confirmed. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. That seems pretty straightforward, right? I mean, when someone sins, we tell them individually first. We bring a couple other people as witnesses, and if they still refuse to repent, we tell the whole church. This passage, this is commonly the church discipline passage that's used a lot when churches have to exercise church discipline for somebody's sinful behavior. But I think it gets way overused and kind of universalized, as if all conflict that happens, this is the only model we have for conflict resolution, that everything gets filtered through, well, does it fit Matthew 18? As if this is some magical formula that we're going to use. For any conflict, for any confrontation, for any sin that needs to be addressed, etc. And so it's also, on top of that, it gets commonly weaponized to blame victims, so by abusers. And to ignore, it's a good distraction to ignore abuse. Say, she reported it wrong, she didn't do Matthew 18, therefore you don't need to worry about it. And it's a good distraction. So does this passage mean that a woman who has been raped should go and meet with her rapist one-on-one to confront him about his sinful behavior? Hopefully your gut tells you no. That's exactly how it has been used in some church abuse situations, right? But I want to look, not just at gut level, but let's look at what this passage really means. What is it Jesus is really trying to say? And so this passage was part of a larger response by Jesus to a question from his disciples. So disciples asked Jesus, they came to Jesus and said, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? That's Matthew 18:1. So Jesus calls a child to himself. He calls the child and those that are like him. He says, these are the greatest in heaven. Those who are humble, those who lack any social standing like children did in that society, those who are overlooked and cast aside. Right? He's saying this is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. It's this little child that's nothing to you. And then in verses 6 through 10, he talks about the importance of not causing one of those little ones to stumble. He says, and then he's saying, don't be a stumbling block for one of these kids. He says in very severe terms, do not be a stumbling block to one of these kids. To children as the direct object of what he's talking about, but also by definition, he's also referring to broken, vulnerable people without status, whatever, someone who would be like a child in a certain sense to them. So then in verse 6 through 10, he talks about the importance of not causing them to stumble. And then right before this passage we quoted, he talks about pursuing one that is lost. So this is the famous, if you've read this passage, you'll remember Jesus talking about the leaving the 99 to go after the one. It's a famous passage that gets quoted a lot. Not usually with what comes right after it. They're usually told very separately. But this whole thing of if he has 100 sheep and the shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost and goes astray, he's going to leave those 99 that are safe to go find that one sheep that is lost. Okay? That's the context for this statement. He's a shepherd who will do anything to find and help one of his sheep that is lost, one of his sheep that's in danger, that is hurting, right? So just like he pursues and helps the sheep that is lost, he wants us to have the same attitude. So he is talking about having a heart that cares, loves, and pursues those who have gotten off track. So think about this. Who has more power in the scenario that Jesus described, right? The person confronting the sin or the person being confronted? As you think about that, who has more power? I think the power dynamic is very much a shepherd. We're talking about a shepherd pursuing a lost sheep here. The shepherd is the leader. The shepherd is going after a sheep. He's going to pursue this sheep that is vulnerable and lost. The shepherd is the leader who is in power. And so when we're talking about a sheep has gone astray, just as he's giving the example of somebody who's gone off into sin, we're talking about pursuing somebody who has gone off track, this person who is lost, who's hurting, who's vulnerable like a lost sheep. If I'm going after that person, I am the strong person here. I'm the person who is in a solid position. I see somebody hurting. I'm going to go pursue them and make sure that I get them back and get them safe, right? So we're talking about the shepherd pursuing is the one who has more power. But now imagine a woman who has to report the sexual abuse of her pastor boss, like we just talked about, at Willow Creek with Bill Hybels. Who has more power there, right? It's exactly the opposite. So it's asking this woman who is vulnerable, who's been hurt, who's been a victim, who has been sexually assaulted by this very powerful man. If you talk about in Bill Hybels' cases, he's connected to all kinds of celebrities and wealthy people. He's friends with an ex-president. He's friends with Bono and Nelson Mandela. He runs this huge multi-million-dollar corporation. It's a church, but it's like a corporation almost. He has so many people behind him, so much money and authority and fame and all this kind of stuff behind him. If I'm going to go have to confront him one-on-one, you're asking this powerless woman who's been a victim that she has to go back and meet one-on-one. This is not addressing that, right? This is a good process to use. If you are a shepherd, if you're a pastor, if you're a leader, you're a minister, and you know somebody that's hurting, by all means, if you know of a person that is caught up in a struggle, and I know they relapse, I know they've fallen back, then it's really good to say, go to them one-on-one first. Don't make a big show of it. Go talk to them privately and see if you can win them over and get them back on track. And if that doesn't work, take some people with you to confront them directly. It's a good process if done lovingly and done for the right purpose. In those cases, it's great. But there's a specific type of scenario that it was aiming towards. And it can be used wrongly that way too, but that's a separate discussion. I think if it's done to express concern out of love, this is a great process. But this statement by Jesus, it was never intended to be lorded over an abused person and used to criticize their response to the harm done to them. It was designed to help us lovingly pursue someone who is struggling, right? To use it in a judgmental way to negate the legitimate testimony of an injured person, to me, is really sickening. Like, we should not be using that passage that way. That's not what it is. And so I want to look at another biblical example, too, of abuse. And I think this illustrates why it's so hard for a victim to report. And So this story may flip things on their head a little bit. When we talk about how dangerous the truth can be, our expectations out of these may be kind of flipped here, but it still gives us a vivid example why it's so hard to report abuse, because of these power dynamics and stuff. So we're going to flip the gender roles here, because we're going to talk about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And so often we might talk about a sexual assault or sexual harassment. We're talking about a male as the perpetrator, and we're talking about the woman as the victim. And in this case, it goes the opposite direction. So first, I want to set the scene. So let's see it in Genesis 39, 1 through 4. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord had caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. So we see God blessing Joseph. We see him elevating him. But also, notice he was a slave. If you notice this a little bit, that Potiphar bought him. He was, if you don't know the story of Joseph very well, he was sold into slavery by his brothers. They sold him off. And so he ends up in the house of being a servant in the house of this guy who was a very high official to Pharaoh in Egypt. So he's working in this powerful guy's house, but he is a slave. He gained the trust of Potiphar, though, which you see is he was trusted with everything in his house. Verse 6 also tells us that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So we see he was a good-looking guy, okay? And so Potiphar's wife begins to sexually harass him and proposition him, but he refused her advances. And so, good for him. At a certain point, you're going, man, he's so strong. You love Joseph. You're saying, good, he's doing the right thing. He's resisting. This woman's trying to hit on him, but he's not doing it. But eventually, this unravels. And so we see this part starting in verse 11. It happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So he left his garment beside her until his master came home. So she left his garment beside her. Then she spoke to him with these words, the Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me, and as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Now when his master, this is Potiphar, heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, this is what your slave did to me, his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. So obviously, we have a bad look, right? He gets caught in a situation where Joseph is, he's tried to resist. She catches him where there's no one there, and she gets a hold of his garment. So he flees outside. So he flees from the house probably naked, right? This does not look good, right? The situation looks very, very bad. And obviously, she had cornered him when no one else is around, but the wife is apparently giving up on seducing him at some point, right? She decides to turn the blame on him instead, right? She's not going to get him, then she's angry at him. So I think one of our things, first of all, I like to ask the question, does this count as abuse? And so that's our first question. Does it really count as abuse? Because we could take a situation like this and easily think, well, okay, so, poor you, this woman was really trying to get with you. She's hitting on you and trying to proposition you, and you could easily just take it, especially when you have a guy as the victim. It's easy to paint it as like, oh, poor you, these women want you, right? Like, and we can kind of mock that. But I want you to think back to our characteristics of abuse. Do we see a power differential in this relationship? There's a big power differential. He's a slave in their house. This woman is the wife of this high official to the Pharaoh. So she has a lot of power, both financial and cultural power and political power. And so big power differential in that relationship. Do we see manipulation? Clearly, I don't think it's an accident that he came and there was no one there in the house. She obviously was looking for an opportunity. He had resisted her advances before, and so she finds a way to keep kind of concocting a scenario to get him caught here. Do we see a violation of consent? Clearly. I mean, he has said no multiple times, and she keeps trying to force it. And we see dehumanization. All of those are present. She dehumanizes him. She very much just sees him as an object to be used for her. So I like to think particularly the power differential and how it affects things. Normally someone propositioning him, pursuing him, if this was just, it might be annoying, if you had this woman who really wanted you and you're not interested in her and she keeps coming after you, that would be annoying, but it wouldn't necessarily be traumatic or abusive. This is why we might be tempted to dismiss it. But I want you to think of what her powerful relationship with his boss and the top official affects those interactions. If he gives in, if he does it, if he sleeps with her and gives into that pressure, what does that do to his job? Now his job is in danger. I mean, he risks his job and his life if he gives into that. He knows the risk of what she's asking him to do. If he gets caught with anything like that, it's over for him. But if he turns her down, as we see now, he turns her down, he gets in trouble as well, right? Because he has no power. So it puts him in a bind, and he immediately knows the danger of the situation that he's in. That no matter what I do at this point, my life and my job, my life, all that are in danger with this whole situation. And so here's innocent Joseph in jail. We're trying to do the right thing. But here's the question. Why didn't Joseph report what was happening with Potiphar's wife? This happened multiple times, right? So you can come back the same way we tend to treat abuse victims. You can come back to him and say, well, Joseph, why didn't you just tell Potiphar before that his wife was trying to come after you, that she's trying to come onto you? Why don't you just tell the truth? Why didn't you report it? And we can only speculate, but I would like to add a few observations that relate to the danger. This is why reporting can be dangerous. Number one, the powerful people control the narrative. Think of power dynamics here. Once the wife of an important official cries out, who's going to believe a slave like Joseph? When it comes down to it, if you're the slave and she is the wife of a very high up powerful man, who's going to believe your report? And he knew that, right? So this is so often true for abuse victims, right? They're often the less powerful and their story is not believed. It's often part of why they're chosen. Someone who's in a powerful position has an eye for it. This person doesn't have the power to credibly accuse me. People are very aware of that. So some abusers are very, very crafty at that, at choosing and manipulating the situation for their victims, that they choose somebody intentionally who doesn't have much power or whose voice won't be counted. No one's going to care what this woman says or this guy says because they're not going to be reputable. That person's an addict. I can just say they're using, right? They can use a situation like that to say, oh, this person's just, they're, homeless or, whatever. You can take a victim and put them in a position where they don't have much power and no one's going to believe them. And so the powerful people, when you have this big power differential, the powerful person can control the narrative. And this is what what Potiphar's wife did, is that all she had to do was say, this is what happened, and Joseph's in jail. No one cared what his version was. When she said that he was trying to pursue her and he was trying to rape her, that's all that mattered, right? So powerful people control the narrative, and their story is what's going to likely get believed. They're going to seem more credible. And then there can even be a backlash to reporting it. Say Joseph had told early on, if he'd said, hey, Potiphar, your wife, she just keeps hitting on me. She keeps telling me she wants me to lie with her. That would be a roll of the dice, right? Is Potiphar going to believe that? Is he going to want to believe that his wife is doing that? If he doesn't want to believe that, then he's going to say, I don't need you around anymore, right? There's a very big risk to doing that. If he's not believed, it's trouble, right? So here's the second piece. The powerful people control the mechanisms of justice. And so because her husband's a high-ranking official, Potiphar's wife makes the accusation, Joseph ends up in jail, not her. She has the ability, by controlling the story, that she can control the story. She can activate her husband's anger. She can punish Jacob and make sure that everything gets focused on, or punish Joseph, but she makes sure everything's focused on him. Running example of this on Netflix, there's a show called Victim/Suspect, and it's really disturbing. And it shows some real life examples of this, of women who have been raped or sexually assaulted in some way, who make accusations, who actually report the way they're supposed to, and then there's a pattern that this reporter found of not only were they not believed because of the complicated what happens in their memory and sometimes the iffy kind of details of a sexual assault situation, but not only are they not believed, but then they get pressured by the cops into recanting and saying that they made it up. And then once that happens, the police charge them with filing a false report. So you have your victim who was sexually assaulted who ends up going on trial for their own crime of false reporting because they were just pressured into a false confession of that. They're really, really disturbing to watch. They've got real interviews with these guys. You see real kind of police interviews and how they get pressured into eventually just caving in and saying, "You're right, I made it up." And so not to see people recant their story under pressure and turn into this, it's like justice in its worldly sense. It favors those with money, who have lawyers, who have power, who have influence. It does. They're going to have an easier time. It's the way of the world. And so if you're poor, it's really hard to get an unjust sentence straightened out. Like in Joseph's case, if you're a poor person, a slave, you're a powerless person who gets put into this situation. It's very hard to get it straightened out, even if the truth is on your side, because the powerful people will control those things. They have much more influence on the mechanisms of justice. So we'll read this real quick. This is Ecclesiastes 4:1. It says, "I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them." And this is justice can be frustratingly elusive for victims. And so, especially since their emotions are erratic due to the trauma they've endured. So it is hard to convince yourself to endure the stress of having to recount your abuse when justice seems unlikely to occur. So those two, the powerful people control the narrative. The powerful people control the mechanisms of justice. And then third one, victim fears the backlash. I am sure Joseph never reported before because he didn't think he'd be believed. He thought it would just get him in trouble. And how would Potiphar react if the slave came to him and told him his wife was trying to seduce him? It's just as likely he would be in trouble for slandering Potiphar's wife, and as it would be to be believed and be helped. So such is the case for a lot of victims. They're not going to be believed. They're putting a revered person in a negative light, or they're going to get judged. They're going to get criticized. They're going to have to share some really painful things who know nothing about them. And so they don't want to deal with all of that backlash. So it becomes hard. So my goal with this is it gives you a little bit of compassion for victims and how they respond. That this is a really hard thing. If you've grown a little bit more sympathy for how an abused person responds to me today, that's a win. That's what we're going for. I also hope that, as I mentioned earlier, that it gives you some greater discernment in this narrative around reporting. So we've talked about it from a biblical side, and I think your ears should perk up when you hear an accused person's defense center around the failure to report or the delay in reporting. When someone's saying, "Oh no, she can't be credible. Why'd she take so long to report it?" Or you hear on a church situation and they're saying, "Well, she didn't follow Matthew 18, so," and they just write it off. Your ears should perk up because that is usually a sign that the wheels are in motion from an abuser to try to cover. So I hope that develops some discernment that some of these narratives, some of these passages, you start to go, okay, wait, that's not really accurate. So hopefully after today, you won't be naive about that at least. But to help that too, I don't want to just talk about, we talked about it from a biblical side. I want you to know there's a biblical basis to what we're talking about. But I also wanted to help you see the reality of what happens when someone is abused or someone's trying to report. So we're very fortunate to have Shelley Holdman here. And Shelley is the president of Safe Now. And so Safe Now stands for Sexual Assault Forensic Exams for Nowata, Osage, Washington counties. She has a lot of experience to support and advocate for survivors when they have to report abuse. She's been there in the room with people when they're having to do this. And so I'm going to pass it off to her. I'm going to let her share a little of what it is like in real life when someone has to actually report like a sexual assault in a police or hospital kind of setting. So, Shelley, I'll pass it.
Like Mike was saying, I'm Shelley Holdman. I am the president of Safe Now, and I'm also a community advocate with Safe Now. I am also a strangulation prevention and awareness expert. So first of all, abuse is about power and control, and it's about the abuser using all of their power to control the victim. It is incredibly traumatic, and when it occurs, the victim would most likely be in disbelief. They might want to just forget that it happened. They might want to put it out of their minds and just try to move on. So let's talk, for instance, about sexual assault. First of all, it's important to note that if you are 18 or older and you were sexually assaulted, it is your decision whether or not you want to involve law enforcement. If it's someone who is under 18, then we have to report it. Everyone in Oklahoma is a mandatory reporter if it's someone who's under 18. So imagine with me that a woman has just been sexually assaulted, and she's been assaulted by a man. She has been through the most horrific experience of her life. There'll be a lot of shame that goes along with that. She'll replay everything that happened in her mind over and over, and she'll start to second guess every decision she made that led up to that assault. She will start to blame herself and say, well, maybe I shouldn't have worn what I wore. Maybe I stayed a little bit too long in that place. Maybe I should not have laughed at his jokes. Maybe I let him think that I was interested when I was not. And she starts blaming herself and even starts to have some self-loathing. But the shame and the blame should not be on the victim. The shame and the blame goes on the abuser and the abuser only. So there will be shame, there will be self-blame, and the shame is even worse if it's a male victim. So that's why we don't see a lot of men reporting, even though we know there are men who are abused, who are sexually assaulted, and they're sometimes victims of domestic violence as well. But they're ashamed if they were sexually assaulted because they might think that people would say, well, you're a man, how did you allow this to happen to you? How could you let this happen? And does this mean that you're gay if this happened? So we don't see a lot of men who come forward when they are sexually assaulted, but we do know that it happens to men as well. We have had victims who are men. So we've had victims who are men, women, and children. And when I talk about this, I will talk about the woman being the victim and the man being an abuser, just because we see most women who have abused. So if she does make the decision to report the assault, well, now she has to tell the police, and she has to go into the police station and talk about it. The simple act of just possibly having to tell her story to an officer who might be also a male, if she was assaulted by a man, then that simple act can be an added stressor for her, just having to talk to a man about it. Now she has to tell all the painful details about what happened and what was done to her. And she has to tell that information to a complete stranger. Even though it's an officer, he's still a stranger. The officer might want her to give all the details in chronological order because he wants to know step by step what happened and how did it happen in that order. The problem with that is sometimes the traumatic brain does not work that way. When you're traumatized, the brain starts working in completely different ways, and memories are formed in completely different ways than they would normally. So a few days after the incident, she might remember something that happened that she didn't report. But now she's going to second guess herself, well, do I go in and report this? Or are they going to say that I'm making it up? Are they going to say, why didn't you tell us this 2 days ago? Or are they going to say, well, you can't just add to your story now. So she's going to question herself on, did that really happen? Am I making that up? Or what are they going to think when I come forward with this additional information? If her attacker was someone in a powerful position, like we talked about Pastor Hybels before, and he was her boss or CEO of the company, and she's not, say she's an assistant in the company, she's going to worry that he is a powerful man. Nobody is going to believe me. Everybody is going to believe him. Or they might think that she's making it up because she's looking to have a payday. She's looking to make money off of this. So she's making it up. So she's not going to report because she's going to think nobody is going to believe me. And that's one of the big reasons why women don't report. If she then decides to go ahead and proceed, then after the report, she'll be taken to the hospital for a forensic medical exam, which is what we do at SAFE now. So a forensic medical exam is a head-to-toe exam, and it's a very involved exam. At the hospital, she's going to have to now give her story once again to the forensic nurse who's going to do the exam, and possibly to a doctor who is going to have to look for injuries. She's going to undergo a physical exam, a head-to-toe exam. This might also involve a possible female gynecological exam. And evidence will be taken, evidence swabs will be taken, and lots of photographs will be taken. All of this still is done only with her consent. Nothing is done without her consent. And at every step of the exam, they ask for consent. Do you want us to go ahead and take pictures? Or do we have your consent to do swabs? Do we have your consent to take this as evidence? Because she did not give consent to what happened to her. So we want to make sure we give her back a little bit of that power by letting her give consent to every section of that exam. If she says no to any of it, then the exam is stopped immediately, and we do not try to force her to do the exam if she does not want to have the exam done. It is incredibly traumatic, again, and it is very embarrassing. At the end of the exam, she might have to take medicine to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. Her clothing might be taken as evidence, so it might have been her favorite outfit, and now she has to get rid of that outfit, and we take that in as evidence. And later again, she might have to tell her story once again when she talks to a district attorney or to a lawyer, or if she has to go to court, then she has to tell her story again in a trial, and she has to go through with a trial, which can take a very long time. And sometimes she has to wait a long time before it even gets to trial. It could be years sometimes. So these are all reasons why women would not want to go ahead and report, because sometimes it just seems easier to just pretend it didn't happen, to not talk about it, to not have to deal with everything that comes after it. In the case of domestic violence, a woman might stay silent and not report the abuse because, again, she's ashamed. If the abuser is a husband, a boyfriend, or a partner, this is the man she loved. This is the man she fell in love with. He was her Prince Charming. They built a life together. They might have children together. And she is going to think, well, I don't want people to know what happened. I don't want people to know that this is what goes on in our home. We have this beautiful life together that people see on the outside, and she's ashamed of what really happens at home. So she will keep it to herself and not report. And again, he might tell her, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen. It happened because I got angry, and you know how I get when I get angry. And he might apologize and say, I'm so sorry, I love you and I would never ever do this to hurt you. I was just mad because of something that happened at work. And so she believes him. He tells her he'll change and he'll go to therapy, and he doesn't go to therapy and he doesn't change, but she keeps hoping that he will because, again, he is the father of her children. If she reports it to the police, then she has to worry about, well, if they show up at my house, they're going to take him to jail. And this is the man she loves. She doesn't want him to go to jail. She just wants the abuse to stop. If the abuser is well known, like we talked about, if he's somebody in the community who everyone knows and he's popular and like a politician, a coach, a pastor, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, she might be worried that what if this affects his reputation? What if this affects his career? She doesn't want him to lose his job. She doesn't want him to lose his reputation in the community. but she wants the abuse to stop. But she doesn't want to ruin him because, again, she still loves him. So she will keep it to herself and not report because she doesn't want him to become, to lose everything that he has built and the life that they have built together. She doesn't want to lose that. And she thinks, again, she's not going to be believed because, like we talked a few weeks before, abusers can be very charismatic. You know, they're the life of the party. They're popular and everybody likes them. And she's not going to think that anybody's going to believe her because the person that the world sees on the outside is this charismatic man who everybody loves. But she sees the monster at home. And nobody's going to believe her that the guy that she's describing is the same guy that they know and love. So she keeps that to herself. And what if the abuser is in law enforcement? What if he's a police officer or sheriff? What if he's a judge? Then who does she report to? She can't walk into the police station and report on one of their own because she's not going to think that the police is going to believe her when it's one of their own. And again, she's going to think that that's going to put her in even more danger if she walks into the police station to report that her husband, who is a police officer, is an abuser. And she might not have any money or anywhere to go. Again, we talked about abusers. One of the tactics that they use is isolation, where they keep you from everybody you know and love, and they might move you across the country to keep you away from everybody who you know and love. They might get mad that you're hanging out with your family and friends. And so every time they get angry that you're hanging out with your family and friends, you get into trouble and you get beat on. So little by little, you stop hanging out with your family and friends. And they isolate you and keep you to themselves. That way, your whole world just revolves around you, the abuser. So she has no one to turn to. She has no one to talk about what happens at home. And she is by herself. And she might be doing it to protect the kids. And she thinks, well, if he's taking it out on me, at least he's not taking it out on the kids. So she puts herself as a barrier between him and the children to protect the children from being abused by him. If she's a stay-at-home mom and he is the breadwinner, then she might not have access to any of the money that they have. So she's going to worry, well, what am I going to do if I do leave? How will I pay for anything? How will I live? Where will I live? Because now he controls all the finances and she has nothing of her own. If there are kids involved, she has to worry what will happen to the kids if we leave. How will I take care of the kids? I have no job. He controls the money. I have no one. I have no family to turn to. Who's going to take us in? She might not know of any shelters they could turn to, and she might not even want her kids in a shelter. She might not want to have to put them through that. So she's going to wonder, well, what am I going to do with the kids, and how am I going to protect the kids, and how am I going to take care of the kids? At least she would think, at least if we stay, then they have a home and I'm not taking them out of the only home that they know. And I'm not taking them away from their father. So she might worry about the kids. What will happen to the kids if we have to leave? If she has something negative in her past, or if she's ever dealt with depression or anxiety, she might worry that he's going to bring that up later and say that she's an unfit mother because she went through all of this before. She had bouts of depression and anxiety, and she's not fit to be around the children. So she's going to worry that he's going to bring up everything in her past if they actually make it to court, and that he's going to get full custody because he's going to bring up everything that has happened to her in the past. If she's had issues with drug and alcohol use in the past, she's going to worry that he's going to bring that up and bring that to the court and say that she's unfit to be a mother, and that not only will she lose her home, but she will also lose her kids. And the number one reason that women stay in an abusive relationship is out of fear. So we know that abusers use fear. They use power and control to They use their power by any means necessary to control their victim. And one of their tactics that they use is fear. If this woman has been beaten, if she has been traumatized by him, if he has been emotionally abusive, mentally abusive, he has taken away a little bit of her every time that he abuses her. He's stripped of her of all her confidence. He has beaten her to where she's now scared of him every time she sees him. Whenever he comes home, she's wondering, what mood is he in now? And what do I need to keep him in a good mood so that he doesn't harm me or harm the children? He has most likely threatened her and threatened future harm if she even thinks of leaving. And he has probably even threatened to kill her. If she has been strangled by the abuser, then she has been taken to the brink of death every time that he has strangled her. We know now that abusers are the most dangerous, stranglers are the most dangerous of the abusers. These stranglers are the ones who are mass shooters, and they are the ones who will shoot at a police officer when they come to the house. Stranglers are the most dangerous. If a woman has been strangled by an abuser, then her chances of dying at his hands goes up by 800%. That's what the research shows. So she knows now that she is probably safer to stay with him than to leave. We have seen from the research that there's a danger zone for victims. And the most dangerous time for a victim is when she is leaving that relationship. And that danger zone extends for 3 months after she leaves the relationship. And this is a danger zone because now the abuser has lost all power and control. He has no power over her, and she is regaining some of her control. So now he does not care, and he is going to try to kill her or do whatever he needs to do to get her back and to hurt her as badly as he can to teach her a lesson. So that is a dangerous time for her. So it's not just easy for her to just leave. And when we say you should just leave him, it's not that simple because it's very dangerous for a woman when she leaves. So then how do we help, and how do we support victims, and how do we help someone who might be in an abusive situation? Well, the first thing we can do is believe them. It doesn't matter how charismatic their abuser is, doesn't matter if we think we know this person, and if they say this is what's going on at home, believe them, because it's very difficult for somebody to come forward and talk to someone and say, hey, I'm being abused at home. One of the things we don't want to say is, why are you staying? Why are you staying with him? Or just leave. Okay, because when we say, why are you staying, then we're putting the blame on the victim. We're saying, well, it's your fault that this is happening because you're staying in the relationship. And we don't want to blame the victim. Like we said, the blame belongs on the abuser, not on the victim. So we need to say, why is he doing this to you? You don't deserve this. We need to make sure we're putting the blame on the abuser, not on the victim. Because we have to remember the victim has been beaten, they have been traumatized, they have been demoralized, and they have no confidence left. They have been programmed to function and do what the abuser wants them to do. And they live every day in fear, and fear is the powerful, powerful tool that the abusers use to control their victims. So one of the best things we can do is to be a friend. Just listen. And listening is huge. It's something that everyone can do. We listen and let them talk, let them tell their story. And that helps them to regain a little bit of their power. We want to be a person they could come to for prayer, and we want to let them know that we are sorry. So if you can just say, I am sorry for what you're going through, that is huge. Just letting someone know that you are feeling what they're feeling, just a little bit of what they're feeling, and you're there for them. Don't be judgmental, and Don't be judgmental about their decisions to stay. If she is having coffee with you and then she says, okay, well, I got to go back home now. Don't judge her and say, well, why would you go home when you just told me all this bad things that's going on? That's being judgmental, and again, that's blaming her, okay? She has to do what she needs to do to survive, and sometimes it takes a long time before a woman is able to escape. And sometimes it takes them building up and forming a plan of escape. Sometimes the escape happens in the middle of the night and they weren't even planning to escape, but they just decided this was the time to go. But we are not in a position to tell them when is the right time to go. They have to come to that place and that decision on their own. Don't speak negatively about the abuser because, again, she loves him still. It might be her husband, might be her boyfriend, and she loves him. So you saying something negative about him is not going to help because she still loves him, and part of her still loves the Prince Charming part of him. So don't offer a lot of advice, because if you haven't been in that situation, you don't know what she's going through. Even if you are in a domestic violence situation, it's completely different from her situation. So don't offer a whole lot of advice, because that's not what she needs from you right now. And don't preach to them, okay? What we can do, we can ask, what can I do to help? What do you need? How can I help you right now? She might say nothing, but keep asking, saying, what do you need? How can I help? Because she might come up with a way you can help. What we can do, we can learn about all these resources, learn about Safe Now, and there's several other great organizations here in Bartlesville. Bartlesville has a wealth of organizations that are ready to help, and you can get as much information that you want from these organizations, so you can learn about how you can help victims. If she agrees, you can volunteer to keep a record of the abuse. And when she comes to you and tells you what happened last night, you keep a record of it. You keep dates and times and everything that she said. You just write everything down and keep that record for her so that when she is ready to leave and when she does need that for court, then she has all that information all together. You can help her work out establishing a safety plan, because she's going to need a plan on how she's going to escape. And you can get that safety plan from Safe Now. You can get it from other organizations. You can get it online. Just it will give you a list of what things you need to do, things that she needs to gather together, copies of important papers that she should have, and records that she should keep. And like I said, they're going to have to come up with that plan on their own. And sometimes it happens in the middle of the night without a plan. Like I have a friend who is living here in Bartlesville, and she was in an abusive relationship. She lived several states from here, several states north. And in the middle of the night, after she was beaten, she got in her car, grabbed her purse. That's the only thing she had was her purse and the clothes that she was wearing. And she just kept driving. She started driving. She didn't know anyone in Oklahoma. She didn't know where she was going, but she just kept driving until she made it to Oklahoma. She stopped in Oklahoma because that was the first place she felt safe. So sometimes they don't even have a plan, but they need to have people in their corner so they know that I have someone I can call in the middle of the night, and let her know that you will be that one who will answer the phone in the middle of the night if she calls. And let her know that she's brave, even though she's going back to that relationship. Every time you talk to her, she is still brave to do that because she knows what she's going back into. So let her know that you think she's brave. Let her know that she has a friend who loves her. Let her know that you believe in her. And again, just let her know that you believe her. And let her know that you're praying for her. So the best thing we can do is to be a friend and to be educated. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. That was really helpful. And let me just pray for us as we finish up. God, I am thankful for what we got to discuss. Thankful for Shelley and all that she shared, all that she does for victims of assault. And God, we just we want to be a light for you. We want to be a support for you. And so for anybody here that has taken part in this class, that's watched this class, that's learning from it, anybody hearing this, and for us here at our church, God, when we come into contact with somebody, we know it happens in this world. And so when someone comes on our doorstep or someone we know comes and reports and says, hey, something happened yesterday, God, help us to be the kind of support that Shelley talked about, the kind of person that listens and cares, that doesn't judge, the kind of person that supports them through whatever hard thing they're going to have to do to face it, that will bear with somebody and be patient while they figure out a plan, and that will believe them and support them in whatever. Help us to be the strength and support and encouragement that those who are being hurt, those who are victims, will need to have. God, help us to be that. And God, we just pray for your empowerment on all of those things. Bless us as we go in Jesus' name.